Being home alone wasn't a big deal to me. At 25, I wasn't some kid spooked by creaky floorboards or shadows in the corner. My parents were out of town for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. I'd planned on nothing more than pizza, a few beers, and a horror movie marathon. The house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever really happens. Every house looked the same, every yard neatly trimmed. It was the kind of place that lulled you into a false sense of security. So when the sun went down, and the house got eerily quiet, I didn't think much of it. Around 9 p.m., I settled onto the couch with a slice of pizza in one hand and the remote in the other. The living room lights were dim, the flicker of the TV casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows just enough to make the house feel alive. I was halfway through a movie when I heard it. A soft tapping at the window. It was faint, almost too quiet to notice over the sound of the TV, but it was there. I paused the movie, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. The tapping came again, rhythmic and deliberate. My first thought was the wind, maybe a tree branch brushing against the glass. But there were no trees near that window. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the dim room. Slowly, I walked to the window, my heart beating just a little faster than it should have been. I pulled the curtain aside, half expecting to see nothing. Instead, I saw a face. A man stood on the other side of the glass, his features partially obscured by the reflection of my flashlight. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and his mouth was twisted into a crooked smile. He didn't move, didn't react to the light, just stood there, staring at me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice shaky. The man didn't move. He just kept staring, his smile growing wider. I fumbled for the lock on the window, double-checking that it was secure, and then grabbed my phone to call the police. My hands trembled as I dialed, my eyes never leaving the man at the window. But when I glanced back, he was gone. I froze, the phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher picked up, her voice calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? There was a man at my window, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He was just standing there, staring. Is he still there? I looked again. The yard was empty, the street beyond quiet and still. The only sound was the faint hum of the wind. No. He's gone. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me as I checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. She asked if I wanted an officer to come by, but I declined. It was probably just some creep messing around. He was gone now, and I didn't want to overreact. After hanging up, I tried to shake the unease. The house felt different now, heavier, like the shadows in the corners had grown longer. I turned off the movie and decided to head upstairs to my room. As I passed the hallway leading to the back door, I stopped cold. The door was wide open. I was sure I'd locked it. I always locked it. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, the cool night air brushing against my skin. The yard beyond was dark, the faint glow of the porch light barely illuminating the edge of the fence. Then I saw them. Footprints, leading from the porch into the house. Wet, muddy prints that disappeared into the hallway. My heart raced as I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy flashlight, and backed toward the stairs. That's when I heard it. A faint creak from upstairs. Someone else was in the house. I stood frozen at the base of the stairs, clutching the flashlight like it could somehow protect me. The creak upstairs had been subtle, but unmistakable, someone was moving around. My chest tightened, and my mind raced through every possibility. Was it the man from the window? Had he come back? How had I missed him sneaking inside? I glanced toward the back door, still wide open, the muddy footprints leading from the porch to where I now stood. My fingers hovered over my phone, ready to call 911 again, but another creak from upstairs made me hesitate. Whoever was up there already knew I was home. The stairs groaned under my weight as I crept upward, my flashlight beam shaking with every step. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow spilling out of my bedroom at the end of the hall. I knew I hadn't left the light on. As I moved closer, I heard it again, another creak, this time from the guest room. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I approached the door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was inside could hear it. The door was ajar, just enough for me to see a sliver of the room. I held my breath and nudged it open with the end of the flashlight, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was empty. The bed was untouched, the closet door closed, the curtain swaying slightly from the draft of the open back door downstairs. But as I scanned the room, my flashlight caught something that made my blood run cold. A single, muddy handprint on the wall. It was smudged, the fingers long and claw-like, trailing down toward the floor. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and turned toward the hallway. That's when I saw the light in my bedroom flicker. I stepped toward the door, my legs trembling with every movement. The air felt heavier here, oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I raised the flashlight, my fingers slick with sweat, and pushed the door open. My room looked the same as I'd left it, except for one thing. The man from the window was sitting on my bed. His back was to me, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening for something. His shoulders were hunched, his muddy clothes damp and clinging to his thin frame. The same eerie smile was plastered across his face, reflected in the mirror on my dresser. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He just sat there, grinning at the reflection of my terrified face in the mirror. My flashlight beam wavered as I stepped back toward the hallway, my fingers fumbling for my phone. Before I could call 911, he spoke. "You shouldn't have looked," he said, his voice low and rasping, like he hadn't spoken in years. "Looked at what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stood then, his movements slow and deliberate. His head turned, his hollow eyes locking onto mine for the first time. I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to breathe. His grin widened, stretching unnaturally across his face. "At me," he said. The light in my room flickered again, plunging the house into darkness. My flashlight blinked out at the same moment, leaving me in complete blackness. I scrambled for my phone, turning on the screen's light, but by the time I shone it toward the bed, he was gone. My chest heaved as I backed into the hallway, scanning every corner for any sign of him. The house was silent now, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. I bolted down the stairs, not caring about the noise I made, and ran for the back door. But as I reached it, I froze. The muddy footprints were gone. The floor was clean, no trace of the dirt or water that had been there minutes before. I swung the door shut and locked it, then grabbed a chair and wedged it under the handle for good measure. I called the police. The officers arrived quickly, their flashing lights illuminating the yard as they searched the house. They didn't find anything. No man, no muddy footprints, no handprint on the wall. One of them gave me a skeptical look as he jotted down my statement, but I didn't care. I knew what I'd seen. When they finally left, I locked every door and window, triple-checking each one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light in the house on, gripping the flashlight and staring at the back door. Just before dawn, as the first light of morning seeped through the windows, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up, expecting a message from the police or maybe a friend checking in. It was a photo. A photo of me. I was sitting on the couch, exactly as I was now, clutching the flashlight. The picture had been taken from outside the living room window. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. My parents had gone out of town for their anniversary, leaving me to watch the house. I wasn't a kid anymore. At 24, I was used to being on my own. I'd grown up in this house, and nothing about it felt eerie or off. At least, not until that weekend. The first day was uneventful. I went to work, stopped for takeout on the way home, and settled in for a night of movies and scrolling through Reddit. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old wood settling or the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. The rain had started around 8 p.m., tapping lightly against the windows. It was the kind of night that made you want to wrap yourself in a blanket and zone out. By 10, I was halfway through a bad action movie when I heard it. A single thump. I muted the TV and sat up, listening. The sound had come from somewhere upstairs. At first, I thought it might have been the house shifting again, but this was different. It was deliberate, like something heavy had fallen. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, heading toward the stairs. "Hello." I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. I felt stupid as soon as the word left my mouth. Of course no one would answer. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dark except for the faint glow coming from under the door of my parents' bedroom. My heart skipped a beat. I was sure I hadn't left any lights on in there. I moved slowly, my footsteps muffled by the carpet, and pushed the door open. The room was empty, just as I'd expected. The light was coming from the bedside lamp, which flickered faintly as if it were struggling to stay on. I turned it off and scanned the room, searching for anything out of place. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing, the closet door. It was open just a crack. My parents always kept it closed, and I hadn't been in here since they left. "Get a grip," I muttered, stepping closer. My flashlight beam illuminated rows of hanging clothes, a few boxes on the floor, and nothing else. I pushed the door shut and gave it a little extra force to make sure it stayed that way. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the bed. A single photograph. It was an old Polaroid, the kind my dad used to take when I was a kid. I picked it up, my stomach twisting as I realized what it showed. It was a picture of me, sitting on the couch downstairs, taken tonight. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe my mom had left it out as a joke or something. But that didn't make sense. The Polaroid was fresh, the edges crisp, the image perfectly clear. Then I noticed the handwriting on the back. "Nice to see you again." The air in the room seemed to grow colder, and a chill ran down my spine. I left the Polaroid on the nightstand and backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I made my way downstairs. I checked every door and window, making sure they were locked. I even looked behind the curtains and under the furniture, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop myself. Everything was secure. There was no sign of anyone else in the house. By the time I settled back on the couch, it was nearly midnight. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd left the photo there and forgotten about it. Or maybe my mom had taken it weeks ago and left it out by mistake. I forced myself to believe it, even as doubt gnawed at the back of my mind. But then I heard it again. Another thump, this time from the basement. The thump from the basement was louder than the noise upstairs had been. It was sharp, deliberate, and unmistakable. My heart leapt into my throat as I stood frozen in the living room, straining to hear anything else. The rain outside had picked up, the steady downpour masking the faint creaks and groans of the house. But I was certain now, I wasn't alone. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy candlestick from the coffee table, and moved toward the basement door. My phone's flashlight felt weak against the oppressive darkness beyond the doorframe. I hesitated, my hand on the knob, debating whether I should just call the cops. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The lock on the basement door was broken. I was sure it had been fine earlier, I'd even double-checked it during my sweep of the house. Now, the metal latch hung loosely, bent as if someone had forced it open. My stomach twisted as I realized whoever had been upstairs could have gone down there while I was distracted. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. Silence. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and pointed my flashlight down the narrow staircase. The beam illuminated the wooden steps, the concrete floor below, and the faint outline of boxes stacked against the walls. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt colder down here, heavier. I took a tentative step onto the staircase, the wood creaking loudly under my weight. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Another step. And then another. When I reached the bottom, I swept the flashlight across the room. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, storage bins, and tools, just as it had always been. But in the far corner, near an old, disused workbench, something caught my eye. A second Polaroid. It was propped up against a can of paint, the image facing outward. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The photo was another picture of me, taken from outside the house. This time, the angle was from the backyard, looking through the kitchen window. The message on the back read, "You missed me." I dropped the photo like it had burned me, my chest tightening as panic set in. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, the room was plunged into darkness. I smacked the side of the phone, and the light came back on. That's when I saw him. The man from the window was standing at the foot of the stairs, blocking my way out. He was taller than I remembered, his body gaunt and unnaturally thin. His face was even more unsettling up close, his skin pale and stretched tight over his skull, his lips pulled back in that same crooked smile. I stumbled backward, tripping over a toolbox and falling hard onto the concrete floor. The flashlight rolled out of my hand, its beam spinning wildly across the room. For a brief second, the men disappeared into the shadows. "Why are you here?" I shouted, my voice breaking. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried through the room like a hiss. "I never left." I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight and swinging it wildly. The beam landed on the corner where the Polaroid had been, but the man was gone. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I backed toward the stairs, keeping the light pointed at the room. And then I felt it. A hand, cold and clammy, brushing against my shoulder. I spun around, swinging the flashlight as hard as I could, but there was no one there. The man's laugh echoed through the basement, low and guttural, as if it were coming from everywhere at once. I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, and slammed the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the doorknob. I could still hear the laughter, faint and mocking, as I backed away. I ran to the living room, grabbing my phone to call the police. My hands were slick with sweat, making it hard to dial. The operator picked up on the second ring, her calm voice a lifeline. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house, I stammered. He was in the basement. I locked the door, but a loud crash interrupted me. The sound came from the basement, followed by the splintering of wood. I turned to see the door burst open, the chair I'd wedged under the knob lying broken on the floor. "He's coming upstairs." I screamed into the phone. "Stay on the line," the operator said. "Officers are on their way." The line went dead. I backed toward the front door, fumbling with the locks as the sound of footsteps grew louder. The man's silhouette appeared at the top of the basement stairs, his twisted smile visible even in the dim light. I threw the door open and ran into the rain, not stopping until I reached the middle of the street. I turned back, expecting to see him following me, but the doorway was empty. The house stood still and silent, as if nothing had happened. The police arrived minutes later. They searched the house from top to bottom, but found no sign of anyone. The basement was empty, and the Polaroids were gone. The officers tried to reassure me, but their words felt hollow. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at a friend's house, every creak and shadow reminding me of the man with the crooked smile. The next morning, I went back to my parents' house to grab a few things. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed something pinned to the front door. A Polaroid. It was a picture of me, standing in the street, staring at the house. The message on the back read, "See you soon." It was one of those rare weekends when I had the whole house to myself. My roommate, Brandon, had gone camping with his girlfriend, and I wasn't expecting him back until Sunday night. I'd been looking forward to it, just me, the couch, some leftover pizza, and whatever horror movies I could find on streaming. The perfect recipe for a chill night. Our house was small, a one-story rental tucked into a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was home. The kind of place where you could hear every creak in the floorboards, where the pipes groaned when the shower ran too long. It had its quirks, but nothing I hadn't gotten used to. That night, the rain started around 8 p.m. It wasn't heavy, just a steady drizzle that pattered against the windows and made the air feel colder than it actually was. I was halfway through my second slice of pizza when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder. For a moment, there was nothing but static. I was about to hang up when a voice came through, faint and distorted. "Is this Jake?" I frowned. "Yeah, who's this?" The voice paused, then said, "You're alone, aren't you?" My stomach dropped. "Who is this?" I demanded, sitting up straighter. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart racing. It had to be a prank. Probably Brandon messing with me from wherever he was camping. I shook it off, tossed the phone back on the table, and hit play on the movie again. But I couldn't relax. The words stuck with me, "You're alone, aren't you?" The sound of the rain outside seemed louder now, each drop hitting the windows like tiny warnings. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd watched too many scary movies. But then the house creaked, a long, low groan that sounded like it came from the hallway. I paused the movie and listened. Nothing. I grabbed my phone and walked over to the hallway, shining the flashlight app into the darkness. The beam lit up the walls, the framed photos, the closed bedroom doors. Everything looked normal. "Brandon." I called out, just in case. No answer. I headed back to the living room, feeling a little ridiculous. But as I sat down, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My phone buzzed again. Another call from the same unknown number. This time, I answered on speaker. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The static returned, louder now, like a distant windstorm. And then the voice, slow, deliberate, and chilling. "I'm already inside." The call ended. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place. Everything looked the same, the couch, the TV, the pizza box. But the words echoed in my head. "I'm already inside." That's when I noticed the back door. It was open. Just slightly, enough for a sliver of night to peek through. I froze, staring at the slightly open back door. The rain was falling harder now, the drops hitting the patio with an audible rhythm. The dim porch light barely illuminated the backyard beyond. My chest tightened as I realized I hadn't unlocked the door all evening. It shouldn't have been open. Slowly, I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a fire poker leaning against the fireplace. My phone was still in my other hand, the flashlight casting shaky beams across the room. I stepped toward the door, my heart pounding. I reached out, gripping the doorknob, and pulled it shut with a loud click. For a moment, the house was eerily quiet, save for the muffled sound of the rain. I locked the door, twisting the deadbolt for good measure, and stepped back. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, muddy shoe prints, leading from the back door into the kitchen. My stomach churned as I followed them with the flashlight. The prints were erratic, zigzagging across the floor like whoever made them wasn't walking in a straight line. They led to the hallway, where they stopped abruptly. I aimed the flashlight down the dark hallway. My bedroom door was wide open. "Nope," I muttered under my breath, backing toward the front door. My plan was simple, get out of the house and call the cops from the driveway. But as I reached the entryway, something made me stop. The front door was locked. Not just locked, deadbolt. And the chain was latched. I hadn't done that. I couldn't have. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, trying to undo it, but the chain wouldn't budge. A creak echoed from behind me. I spun around, raising the fire poker, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy, suffocating. My phone buzzed again, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up with another call from the same unknown number. I answered, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The static was louder this time, almost deafening. Then the voice came through, clear and sharp. "Look behind you." I whipped around, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow, a tall, thin figure standing at the end of the hallway, just inside my bedroom doorway. But when I blinked, it was gone. The phone went dead. I backed into the living room, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I scanned the room, the shadows seeming to stretch and move with every flicker of the flashlight. The footprints were still there, the muddy trail leading into the hallway. And then I heard it. A faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from the hallway, slow and deliberate. I gripped the fire poker tighter and stepped toward the sound, the floor creaking under my weight. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The scraping stopped. The silence was deafening, the kind that makes your ears ring. I edged closer to my bedroom, every instinct screaming at me to run, but something compelled me to keep going. The door was still open, the room beyond pitch black. I reached the doorway and shone the flashlight inside. My room was empty, or so it seemed. The bed was unmade, the curtains swaying slightly as if stirred by a breeze. But then the beam of light landed on something that made my stomach drop. Another set of footprints. These weren't muddy, they were bare, wet prints leading from the window to the closet. The closet door was slightly ajar. My grip on the fire poker tightened as I stepped inside, my flashlight aimed at the closet. The air felt colder here, heavy with the faint scent of rain and something else, something metallic. I reached for the closet door, my fingers trembling, and yanked it open. It was empty. I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I turned to leave the room, but as I stepped back into the hallway, I froze. The footprints were gone. The muddy trail that had led from the back door to the hallway had vanished, as if it had never been there. The floor was clean, the tiles dry. My phone buzzed again, the vibration making me jump. A text message this time. From the same unknown number. "You're looking in the wrong place." The blood drained from my face. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I stumbled back into the living room, my eyes darting around the room, searching for anything out of place. And then I saw it. The fire poker slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. There, on the coffee table, was a Polaroid. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up with trembling fingers, my heart hammering in my chest. The photo was blurry, but I recognized the subject immediately. It was me, standing in the hallway, holding the fire poker. The photo had been taken from behind. My phone buzzed again, another text message lighting up the screen. "I see you." A shadow moved across the window.